Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to this month's From the Field. Today we are talking with Dr. Corrie Wissner from Arizona State University, and I'm going to let her introduce herself here in a minute, but I wanted to remind you that this is an open conversation. If you have questions, go ahead and either unmute your microphone, raise your hand using the icon buttons at the bottom of your screen, or you can also type a question into the chat and either myself or Jill will ask that question for you if you don't want to ask it yourself. So thank you so much for being with us, Corrie. I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right, well, thanks for having me, Brittany. It's great to be here with everyone. So I'm Corey Wissner. I am currently an associate professor at Arizona State University in the College of Health Solutions, and I teach in the nutrition program. My background is in maternal child health and trying to find novel ways to get important nutrients into the diet for growing children when they tend to eat more potato chips, drink more soda, and there's some room, to maybe have some benefit for them for their growth and development. And grains often come into that space. And I really like to try to modulate the gut microbiome to make them do more work for us. And so I'm excited to talk to you all about that work today.
Okay, thank you. So explain to us a little bit, what is the gut microbiome? We hear that phrase a lot in science magazines or nutrition magazines or articles, but what is it?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that one word. So the gut microbiome is just a collective term to basically describe all of the microorganisms that live inside of our gastrointestinal tract. So primarily the large intestine is really where they live. And when I say microorganisms, I mean bacteria, viruses, archaea, fungi, all kinds of different little bugs that hang out in there and are a natural symbiotic important part of our metabolism. Some people have even likened it to another organ. So we have, the liver, our lungs, our heart. And so these microbes are so important that they actually provide us with a lot of metabolic properties that serve as essentially another organ in some ways.
Okay. And in your research, what have you found? What effects do wheat and other whole grains have on the gut?
So the one major thing that we know for sure, and there's a lot of data to support, is that grains are a really important source of dietary fiber for Americans. It's where we get the majority of our fibers from, primarily wheat, really, because that's the number one grain that is really a staple in every home. And that fiber, we don't have enzymes to break down, but the microbes inside of our gut do. And so when they break it down, they produce things called short chain fatty acids. And those are really important fuel sources for our intestinal cells. They also get into our blood and travel around, and they can help lower our blood pressure, improve our heart health. They can travel to our brain and have effects on our mood in positive ways. So they do a lot. And that's just all through transforming dietary fiber, a non-digestible substance for us, into something that is usable for us. The other thing that they do in processing grains is turn phytochemicals or other nutrients that they're not vitamins or minerals, but they're special things that grains have. For example, wheat has ferulic acid in it, which is anti-inflammatory. And so microbes can help to free that from things it's bound to so that they can get into our blood and absorb around and have anti-inflammatory benefits for us.
What are some of those other, nutrients that you get from wheat or whole grains that you're not getting elsewhere necessarily? And what are they and what do they do for you?
Well, so if we go back to the fiber example, wheat is a good source of two types of fiber that we call prebiotic fibers. So in the class of fiber, there are the fibers that are just roughage and they kind of pass through. They don't really get metabolized by the microbes in our gut. And then there are ones that have really powerful health benefits, and those are the prebiotics. And so two prebiotics that wheat provides about 70% of in our diet for what Americans consume are inulin and oligo fructose. So these are just sugar monomers that are connected together in ways that we can't digest them, but the microbes digest them. And inulin and oligo fructose have been shown to have important health benefits for weight maintenance. They help with blood glucose management. So for those who may be pre-diabetic or diabetic, these could be valuable for their health. There's quite a pretty robust literature now showing that they can also improve calcium absorption, which could be important for preventing osteoporosis and also helping kids develop a strong skeleton from a young age to kind of mitigate the risk for osteoporosis later on. So they have really broad-ranging functions in terms of health. And then just for comparison's sake, like if you look at inulin and oligofructose, the top four sources of food that we get those from in the American diet are wheat, onions, bananas, and garlic. And so when you think about it in terms of quantities that we're eating, wheat's really the major contributor there. Everyone would have horrible breath, but be able to ward off vampires if we ate that much garlic.
That's right. Perfect for October, right?
Yes.
October conversation. So what we hear a lot, and some people on this call might even experience this themselves, when they eat wheat foods, it gives them a stomach ache, or it makes them feel bloated, or any of those reactions. Not necessarily celiac disease, which is a totally different ballgame, but people who feel like they are gluten intolerant or wheat intolerant, why is that happening in their bodies? And is there something that they can do to counteract it?
Yeah, that's such a tricky question because I think there are so many moving parts to it. So the first thing I think goes back to the inulin and oligofructose. So these are fibers that are primarily made up of fructose sugars, and they are highly fermentable. So gut microbes devour them, and that can produce gas and possibly some bloating and discomfort. The good news is that oftentimes if you eat small doses and then slowly build up to more normal, quantities that an average person would consume, you can really acclimate to that. And so you wouldn't have as many symptoms. It is possible that there could be something else going on. So some people have issues with highly fermentable fibers and sugars. And so they have to kind of take a step back and remove those from their diet first and add them back slowly one at a time to figure out which food is really causing them the most issues. And so that's often called a Fodmap diet, where you're removing those fermentable sugars. Many stone fruits also have a lot of these fructose sugars. The one thing that I always tell people is that just because you get GI distress doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, and you have to put things in perspective. So if you've been avoiding wheat for a long time and then you start eating it again, you're now getting these prebiotic fibers, and your gut bugs are going to get excited and they are going to make gas. It's like their way of having a party. And so you're going to have some discomfort initially, and you will acclimate if you just hold out and give it like a week or two. And I think we have a tendency to be afraid of bodily functions in the US, and we don't want to have gas, we don't want to have bloating. And those are not necessarily always bad things. Bodily functions are normal and a sign of health. And so knowing the difference between a real problem and something that's normal can be challenging. And so talking to your doctor about what that should look like can be helpful. I always caution people to remove grains from their diet, especially wheat, because it is such an important staple food. And for many Americans who have a tight budget, it's very affordable. And so removing something that has so many nutrients and good fibers in it is, there are negative consequences that come with that. And yeah, so I think that kind of addresses the question. There are other things in wheat that could cause people discomfort, but really they have to be diagnosed by a gastroenterologist. And there's a continuum along the lines of a wheat intolerance or other proteins in wheat that may cause some issues. But for the most part, I don't think very many people have an issue with wheat. And I think we just need to be more open to talking about bodily functions and being okay with having a little gas when we eat fiber.
Okay. What have you found in your research about child nutrition and wheat? You mentioned that just briefly in your introduction, and I'm curious what you found.
Well, so I haven't worked with wheat specifically, but I have worked with prebiotic fibers like inulin and oligo fructose. And the work that I was doing was to try to understand how those influence calcium absorption during the pubertal growth spurt. So if you have kids, or you remember when you grew up, you have that awkward growth spurt where you shoot up like a beanstalk and you're all gangly and you don't know where your arms and legs are in space and time. And that's a really important time where you build this protein scaffold, but you haven't mineralized your skeleton yet. So you're more likely to get fractures if you fall. And during that time, there's sort of a 2-year window of opportunity where your bones are like a sponge and you accrue 25% of what will become your adult skeleton. So during that time, if you can hide these helpful fibers like inulin in the diet, they will actually get fermented, produce more of those short chain fatty acids. And then that basically creates an environment where more minerals will absorb in the lower gut. And so you can increase calcium absorption by anywhere from like 12 to 20%, which is huge. If you do that consistently over a year, you could be adding anywhere from 3 to 5% to your skeleton. And then that's going to help protect your bones from osteoporosis later in life. So that's really the work that I've done. I have not worked with wheat specifically for their fibers, but many of them come from other places and they have very similar properties.
So maybe this isn't the right question to ask you, but when is it safe to start introducing kids to whole grain foods?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So generally speaking, depending on what body of evidence you're following, different groups have different suggestions on when to introduce foods. I think generally the consensus is waiting until 6 months of age to introduce any sort of solid food other than breast milk or formula prior to that. And at 6 months, then that's a great time to introduce whole grains, especially wheat-based products. I'm not aware of any evidence suggesting that you should delay the introduction of wheat, even though there is a potential for allergy. And in many cases, and this is true for nuts, there are some groups that are actually promoting the introduction of peanuts in small doses as early as 4 months, just to help with that initial exposure to prevent allergy. So wheat-based products like breads, it could even be like a hot cereal that you could offer. Those would all be really great foods for a 6-month-old infant to be introduced to.
Okay. What is the recommended amount of whole grains that we should be eating every day?
The Whole Grains Council recommends getting 48 grams of whole grains a day. So that's about 3-ish servings of whole grain products. So maybe 3 slices of bread, or you could have like a muffin that's made with whole grains plus a sandwich. And so pretty easy to target, I think. If you have cereal for breakfast, pretty much every cereal now is considered a whole grain cereal. So that's a good way to get in another serving. And if your bowls are like mine, you fill your bowl, you're getting like 3 servings in one sitting.
All right. We also talk a lot about whole grains versus, maybe you can talk a little bit about this, about whole grains versus just grain. And when we go to the grocery store to buy bread or pasta or any of those things, and it says whole grain, first of all, how do we verify that? Is there even a way? And what is the difference nutritionally between whole grains versus enriched pasta or whatever the other options are?
Mm-hmm. So to answer your first question, how do you know if you're getting whole grains? So this can get a little tricky because some food companies use different terminology on their packaging. So you want to turn over the package to where the nutrition fact label is and look at the ingredient list and see that the very first thing listed after the word ingredients says whole. And then in this case, if we were looking for a whole wheat product, it would have to say whole wheat. If it was not made with whole grain, it would say something like enriched wheat or enriched bleached wheat. If it was white and not an unbleached version. And many manufacturers are getting good at least on the front of the package, putting how many grams a serving provides of whole grain. So you can always look there. And so like I've seen some breads where they have a blend of different flours in their bread. And so they'll say this one slice of bread provides you with 16 grams of whole grain. And so that's helpful. One thing you do have to watch out for is sometimes on the front of the package, they don't use the word whole. And that's really what you're looking for. If the package says multi-grain or mixed grain or something like that, that does not guarantee whole grain. So you're probably getting more of an enriched flour, which isn't a bad thing. Balancing between the two, I think, is important. So if you're not going by the total number of grams of whole grain that you need a day, another way to think about it is of all the grains that you eat in a day, roughly about half of them should be from whole grain sources. And so one thing that we do in my house is my husband is not willing to give up white enriched wheat bread. He loves the heck out of that. So we pick and choose what we eat that's a whole grain. And so we have white bread, but if we have tortillas, they're whole grain tortillas. When we eat cereal, we make sure that we're getting whole grain cereal options. Pasta, we always buy whole wheat pasta. And so when we calculate it all out, it usually comes out to about half of our grains are whole grains, which is the recommendation. So we're hitting the target, but we're doing it in a way that works for our family and allows us to still enjoy the grains that we're eating. Some people really don't like the texture of whole grain bread. And so that's fine. Choose what you like because you're going to eat it if you like it. And even enriched grains are not bad for you. They still have lots of vitamins and minerals in them. There is still some fiber in them as well. And so it's all a part of a balanced diet. And I'd rather see someone eat enriched bread than going out and eating a whole bunch of donuts. So you have to, pick your battles and just make sure that you have a good balance of things.
That is good advice too for people who are trying to feed families with kids.
I would just going back, Corey, to what you were saying kind of more at the beginning. You were talking about gut health and how you have all those organisms in there. And, you know, Brittany brought up that some people really struggle with their gut health. Is there something we can do, like something to promote good gut health besides, you know, we're eating our wheat, but something to help also maybe get it all working together better?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the main starting point is always diversifying your diet. One thing that you can do is sort of pigeonhole yourself in creating an environment for your gut where certain microbes are allowed to proliferate, which may cause you more GI distress than others. So let's say I eat, 3 foods in my diet. Well, the diversity is not there to really build a very diverse community, and that's really what you want. You want to have a diverse set of microbes so that no matter what you introduce to them, they can thrive and manage that system. One of the reasons you want the diversity is because if a pathogen were to get in and find a little place to take up residence, they can actually cause you GI distress, which is not ideal. And so the more prolific and diverse your diet is, and the more diverse your microbiome is, then you're going to have all those little real estate spots taken up, so no pathogens can bind and cause you harm. And you're going to be feeding them something where everybody gets something that they like, sort of just like at the table at home. You want to make sure that you have, something that's going to make meals enjoyable for everyone. And I think when you're thinking about diversifying, think about eating a variety of colors in your diet. Think about adding in maybe some fermented foods like yogurt or kefir, which is going to add healthy microbes to your gut, and filling in some fruits and vegetables. And, sometimes you can get more bang for your buck if you go for something like a cruciferous vegetable like cauliflower or broccoli. There's a lot more of those natural fibers and phytochemicals in those vegetables when compared to things like carrots or celery.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
In your research, have you found anything like things that you maybe shouldn't eat with wheat in the same meal that mess up that diversity and the health of the gut?
I have not come across anything that you shouldn't mix with wheat. Things that have shown some possibly negative consequences are red meats can definitely have some concerns around the microbiome. So especially if you're like me and you love charred barbecue meat, I know that's not good for me, but everything in moderation. So I like to fit that in every once in a while. But microorganisms can take things from meat products that have been charred or really high fat meats that have saturated fat, and then turn those food components into things that could be linked to cancer. And there's just sort of more emerging evidence on that. Another thing that potentially has been shown to kind of appear is microbes can take choline, and that's sort of like almost like a B vitamin. It's present in eggs, and our bodies can also make it, but some microbes can translate that into something called trimethylamine oxide, which has been associated with strokes. But these, just because they're there doesn't mean they're bad. It's really when you've eaten so much of those things that it's basically an excess. And so your body and your microbiome are just trying to like transform them into something. And then because you aren't eating in moderation, you get that overflow of these potentially harmful compounds. The other thing that I've seen in the literature is related to emulsifiers. So things that have emulsifiers in them are basically what make fat and water play nice together. So, you used to get like Italian dressing and you had to shake it up because the oil and water were separated. And then the US food system just happens to put emulsifiers in a lot of things because it keeps food form nice and keeps things all kind of mixed the way one would want them to be. People who eat a lot of emulsifiers, there's some data that show that then those emulsifiers sort of emulsified also the inside of the intestine, and microorganisms got bathed in it, and then they started to like move through our protective mucus layer, and then they were causing inflammation at the cell lining surface. I haven't seen much else come out about that over the last maybe 5 years, but there was definitely like a whole slew of papers that came out about 7 to 10 years ago showing that that could happen. And I think it made people think a little bit more about all the emulsifiers that they were eating. But there are many types of diverse emulsifiers, and some are naturally occurring, like lecithin. And so I don't want to put them all in like a bin that says they're all bad. There are many that are man-made, and I think those are the ones that they were studying, like polysorbate 60 and 80, I think were two of the ones that seemed to be causing issues, but I haven't seen anything related to lecithin, which comes from soy and other plant-based products.
Okay, we have another question. Does wheat protein content or composition have any impact on gut health, or is it strictly a role of starch and fiber?
I haven't seen any literature to suggest that the differences in protein composition make a difference for the microbes in our gut. It's probably still too subtle within the cultivars of wheat when you're comparing to eating something like protein that's just a ton of protein. And I haven't seen anything. So I know like when you mill wheat, you're trying to kind of bin it by protein content because some of those flours will be used for breads, which have a higher protein content, and then the lower proteins options will be used for other things like cereals, and no comparison there. There's no evidence to suggest that one type of end product used from those higher protein wheats have a negative impact on the microbiome.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then another one, is there any validity behind the suggestion that fermented wheat or fermented grains are better for your gut than non-fermented? So sourdough breads, for example, better than your basic Wonder white bread?
Yeah, this is sort of an emerging area where we don't have a lot of really great evidence yet, but the evidence that exists may suggest that fermented wheat products like a sourdough bread may actually have greater vitamin and mineral bioavailability, which means that that fermentation process has created an environment where anything that may have otherwise bound to a mineral has let go, and then that mineral can be absorbed easier. So the pH of the dough could make a difference in the preparation stage. So like the more acidic something is, which definitely is happening when you ferment sourdough, you're creating acids, that those can really help to kind of prime vitamins and minerals for absorption. And I guess this gets into the realm of the idea of like sprouted grains as well, where when you sprout something, new life is starting and you're growing this plant and it's producing things that are going to promote growth. And so there will be a difference in the nutritional composition of a sprouted grain versus one that wasn't sprouted. Now, whether or not the quantities that we eat lead to any sort of health benefit remains to be determined. But definitely when you're just looking at testing and comparing, there are some differences.
Okay, great. Well, we have hit our 30-minute mark, which is usually when we wrap these up. But if anybody has any last questions, go ahead and type them into the chat or unmute your microphone. We'll wait just a second and see if Corrie has anything she wants to wrap up with. Corrie, is there anything else you'd like to add to this conversation?
I guess I just can end by saying that I personally think that wheat is a really important component of our diet, both from an economic standpoint and a health standpoint. And so, I mean, anytime I'm talking to someone and they're, on the fence about whether or not wheat is going to be beneficial for them or if it's harmful, I try to always just ask people to tell me more about why they're feeling the way that they feel so that I can find a place to interject the evidence that I am aware of to try to promote the importance of wheat and the health properties that it has. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about wheat being a GMO, and there are no GMO wheat lines that we currently offer to an American consumer. So it's, we all have to do our part to kind of get that word out there and remind people that we're all in this together and that this is an important grain. Historically, it's been around for centuries and it's completely safe to eat. And it just makes so many wonderful foods too. So, I mean, without gluten, like you can't have a beautifully domed muffin or cupcake or whatever it is that you enjoy eating. And so you have to consider the food science properties too, I think.
And one last question, Corey, have you seen in your research any difference between what we call ancient grains or ancient wheat varieties versus modern wheat varieties and their effect on the gut?
The only thing I'm aware of that does seem like it may have changed is that there have been a few papers comparing the content of those novel prebiotic fibers, and it seems like the more modern varieties have slightly more of those beneficial fibers. And so I see that as a benefit for us because those are functional fibers that are known to have broad-ranging health benefits. And so the fact that as we've bred these new cultivars of wheat, that we've actually been able to increase something that's beneficial without really changing the other properties of the grain, like that's really cool to me. And that's something that I often try to share is like, actually the wheats now have more healthy fibers. And so I think that's been a helpful platform to use to talk about it as well.
All right, that's great. You've given us a lot of great information to kind of help us understand ourselves, what the gut microbiome is and how wheat affects it, but also to help other people understand when they start conversations with us about how maybe they don't eat wheat for different reasons. So thank you so much for that. Thank you all of you who joined us today. This video will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel and to our podcast platforms. So if you have anyone who you want to send it to later or who requests it later, if they want to watch or listen, they can. And you can find them also on our website at idahowheat.org. Thanks so much, Corey.
Thank you, Brittany, for having me.